Coming up on Cannabis Coast to Coast News this week.
What's up, you guys? It's me, Susie from Mota Glass and Latinas in Cannabis. We're here at Hall of Flowers 2024, hanging out with the community. Everybody's coming out, and it's a perfect day here in Santa Rosa.
3,000 miles away in Boston, Massachusetts, it was a good day for duck umbrellas. Cannabis festivals from coast to coast, from the sunshine in the Golden State of California's Hall of Flowers to rain and mud at the 35th Annual Freedom Rally in Boston, Massachusetts.
With the Meltdown Pumpkin Pie, Nova Farms.
Plus, Pennsylvania's legislature is back in session, so will the latest bipartisan effort lead to the long-delayed move to adult use legalization in the Keystone State, or is it just another window dressing delay in cannabis standard time? And a sign of normalization as Barstool Sports, a leading modern lifestyle online media giant, enters into an agreement with multi-state operator Green Thumb Industries in order to brand their products to 66 million followers of the Barstool brand. And a Georgia pharmacy decides to start offering medical cannabis to patients in defiance of a federal threat from the DEA. All that and coast to continent cannabis coverage as we go down under with a new correspondent from the land of kangaroos, koala bears, and rules football. All that on Cannabis Coast to Coast News next.
Be sure to come and check out Hall of Flowers booths and support small business. And don't forget, it is Latino Heritage Month all month long, and we're out here representing the Latinas and Latinos of the cannabis workforce of California. Shout out.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi everyone, welcome to Cannabis Coast to Coast, Pro Cannabis Media's weekly roundup of cannabis news in the U.S. I'm PCM Founder Jimmy Young, filling in for Alaina Pinto, who is off this week, but I promise she will be back next week. We start with a reminder that if you want to make getting access to this show with just one-touch video on demand, then download our new app, PCM TV. It's free and available on the App Store and Google Play. Plus, you will also find PCM TV content back on Roku and other OTT platforms under the Citizen Green TV streaming channel. But up first, a sign of normalization when a major mainstream brand from the world of entertainment and contemporary culture called Barstool Sports has entered into a promotional agreement with Green Thumb Industries. Now, GTI is considered one of the largest and most successful cannabis multi-state operators in this country. Armin Vakali is the chief strategy officer in charge of partnerships, and he said to greenstate.com that Barstool Sports is a cultural powerhouse that speaks directly to the audience we want to reach, one that values authenticity, entertainment, and modern lifestyle choices. GTI-themed content will soon be part of Barstool Sports shows like Macrodosing, The Dog Walk, and 773 TV, featuring GTI brands like Rhythm and Dog Walkers pre-rolls. Our Virginia correspondent Joe Parsons takes a look at whether this new partnership might signify a softening of marketing regulations for the industry.
I'm Joe Parsons with the Virginia Cannabis Connection, and this is the Virginia Cannabis Report on Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We start this week with the new news from Virginia's first powerhouse MSO, Green Thumb Industries from Chicago. In October of 2020, Dharma Pharmaceuticals was the first medical provider to serve Virginia. A little over a year later, with the new rules set forth by the Virginia Board of Pharmacy, Dharma decided to merge with the Midcoast brand Green Thumb Industries to become the first MSO to operate in the Commonwealth. And after an $80 million deal, the two became one to become the provider for Health Service Area 3. Since then, GTI has grown to be one of the nation's largest MSOs, with 91 open retail locations and 20 manufacturing facilities. Pro Cannabis Media's very own Doug Miller last week reported on the GTI refinance and how it affected their stock prices. The ability to refinance their senior debt via a syndicated credit facility is an industry first for the cannabis industry and shows potential on what can be achieved by the industry when the right people get involved. This $150 million 5-year syndicated credit facility is led by Valley National Bank. The company plans to use the proceeds along with its existing cash to retire its $225 million senior secured debt that's due by April 20th of 2025. Now this week, Green Thumb announced a new $50 million share repurchasing program to replace the existing program that expired on September 10th. That program allowed Green Thumb to repurchase 6.5 million shares for $73.3 million. Green Thumb founder, chairman, and CEO Ben Culver said this week, "This buyback program provides greater flexibility to use our cash reserves to repurchase more shares should the opportunity present itself," and added, "The future is bright for Green Thumb as America craves more well-being and more cannabis." Here in Virginia, they've been very active with politicians from both sides of the table and hope to one day get an adult use program here in the Commonwealth so the brand can expand and perhaps be the first recreational operator in Virginia as well. I guess you can say they like to be number one here in the Commonwealth. And finally, if you haven't already done so, please download the PCM TV app. It's available on both the Apple Store and the Google Play Store. You can always watch the latest shows, interviews, special reports, as well as keeping up with the latest contest and everything that's pro-cannabis. It's free to download, so what are you waiting for? Well, that's going to do it for this week from the Virginia Cannabis Connection and reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm Joe Parsons. Until next time, stay lifted.
There are quite a few examples of how screwed up the laws of different states are in regards to adult use or prescribed medicinal legal use of cannabis. First, you've got that entire hemp industry that is still waiting for FDA guidelines on what is approved and legal. Now, since the Farm Bill in 2018 passed, which basically legalized the cannabis sativa plant, lawmakers still aren't the only group that finds this plant complicated. The focus on the THC percentage in this plant causes confusion for ill-informed consumers who enter legal dispensaries thinking that the best or the most powerful legal cannabis has to be the one with the most THC in it. Now add in clueless, lazy, and misinformed lawmakers, and they're all making up the rules as they go along. Plus, add in the ability of humans to find legal loopholes in any rule or law for their own advantage, and you have the mess that has been created in this fledgling billion-dollar industry. Now, despite what the DEA thinks, their definition of hemp is a product derived from the cannabis sativa plant with a limit of 0.3% of THC in dry weight. Two different federal courts over the past 2 years have called that definition too ambiguous and confusing. The problem is scientists, geneticists, and botanists have all figured out ways to get high or intoxicated from THC using Delta-8 or other synthetic forms of that cannabinoid. So now you have two different industries frustrated with the lack of federal guidance over that same plant. Now, some states overreacted by banning all Delta-8 cannabinoid-derived products, but even in some of those states, THC-infused beverages are finding their ways onto the shelves of liquor stores or convenience stores and even gas stations. Now, last week, we reported on the state of New Jersey, who wants to put all the products derived from the same plant under one regulatory body, something both industries welcome. I talked with Jim Higdon from Cornbread Hemp in Kentucky this past week about the state of his industry and the frustrations inherent because of the lack of understanding about this plant. Let me ask you a question. As someone who's in this industry, do you feel like you're getting dicked around, pardon the expression?
Well, I mean, I think you framed it correctly at the top. It's not just Governor Newsom in California who's making bad decisions about hemp and state policy. It's also Governor DeSantis in Florida making bad decisions about hemp and state policy relative to cannabis. It's a perfect example of why the only solution to this problem is at the federal level, because governors have no idea what they're doing. Here in Kentucky, we're fortunate that we've got a good state level policy. Our governor has taken a good, and our legislature too, for that matter, has taken a good tack on regulating adult use hemp cannabinoids in the open market so that consumers are protected, but also businesses are supported. But Kentucky, as a laboratory of democracy, is not leading the federal, the national conversation in like larger states like Florida and California. And in these two cases, we've got two governors who don't know their elbow from a hole in the ground. And so it's a real challenge.
I'm sure.
I've got a lot to say about Newsom, but before we do, let's just talk about DeSantis because it deserves it. A lot of our friends in the cannabis industry are using the worst examples of the hemp industry to characterize the hemp industry, and I just want to nip some of this in the bud. Um, Governor DeSantis in Florida is wrong to oppose Amendment 3 to legalize adult use cannabis in Florida. Everyone in Florida should be voting yes on adult use for Amendment 3. It needs a 60% vote to cross the threshold for a constitutional amendment in Florida. And we at Cornbread Hemp are rooting for it and supportive of it any way we can be. Everyone should be voting yes on 3 in Florida. And Ron DeSantis opposing yes on 3, then decides to throw himself in league with hemp retailers who feel like Amendment 3 will be bad for their business. And so he's supportive of hemp because he's against cannabis legalization. And that's just ass backward, asinine. Makes no sense, has no business in the future of hemp and cannabis policy in America today. So let me just say all that as preface and prologue to Governor Newsom in California is equally wrong-headed and incorrect and proposing bad policy in a bad way to the people of Florida intended on I mean, I don't know what his intentions are, but the effect of it will be to make consumers less safe in the marketplace. It would be one thing for Governor Newsom to suggest that no hemp products could be sold in California retail if the California cannabis dispensary system were above reproach, was a source for safe and effective cannabis for its consumers instead of being mired in a pesticide scandal that would make any California cannabis consumer concerned about getting anything from a California cannabis dispensary. It seems like it's a mess. And what he's trying to do is eliminate safe consumer choice in the marketplace and force consumers into a dispensary system that's lousy with pesticides.
We'll have more of that interview later on this news program, and the entire interview will be available on our website, procannabismedia.com, and our app, PCM TV. Now, there has been quite a mess, needless to say, in the cannabis industry, and a perfect example of this is in the state of Georgia. A year ago, the Georgia legislature enacted a medical marijuana program designed to allow pharmacies to distribute the plant with a medical doctor's prescription. Sounds like a good approach. But the DEA sent out a cease and desist to that state's pharmacies, basically saying they can't follow their own state's laws since cannabis is still a federally illegal substance. Then they threatened that their pharmacy could be jeopardizing their federally issued license to distribute all medicinal products. In Eaton, Georgia, the Living Well Pharmacy is defying the DEA's threat by filling prescriptions written by certified doctors for medicinal cannabis. Vic Johnson has been a pharmacist for 40 years and told the Atlanta Constitution Journal newspaper that it's a new frontier. I really think pharmacies are an ideal outlet for dispensing medical cannabis because if you come to my pharmacy already, we can talk about what medications you already are taking. It makes you appreciate the freedoms of living in adult use state or one of the 38 states that have decriminalized the plant even more. Now, not that states don't have their own issues with some of the confusing laws, and even in some states that have a vibrant billion-dollar market, well, here's Arizona's Karen Black.
I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting with the Arizona Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. According to the Cannabis Business Times, 11 adult use states are projected to be billion-dollar markets in 2024, and Arizona made the list, coming in at number 9. The state is expected to rake in over $1.3 billion by the end of the year. However, it's not all sunshine in the Grand Canyon state. That figure represents a 7.5% decrease from the $1.44 billion in 2023. The article claims Arizona's cannabis retail market is, and I quote, facing one of the largest setbacks in the nation compared to its adult use peers. There is good news, I guess, depending on how you look at it. We have a limited license market here with approximately 160 cannabis dispensaries, which is about 2.2 stores per 100,000 people. That means the average dispensary in Arizona can bring in roughly $8.3 million in sales this year. Well, last week I told you about Earl Camp, and guess what? It's been canceled. But don't despair, the Earl Cup is still taking place October 5th and 6th in Mesa. For info and tickets, visit theearlcup.com. Earl is spelled E-R-R-L. As for other events, the Marijuana Industry Trade Association is holding its monthly networking meeting September 25th in Scottsdale. And High in the Desert is slated for October 5th in Tucson. That's all for this week's Arizona Report. I'm Karen Black from Greenfinger Consulting reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
Two notes from Washington, D.C. this week where no one seems to be moving too fast on any federal reforms before the election in November. This week, a Senate committee approved a bill that would end disqualification for federal jobs if you have used cannabis in the past. And more noise from the Senate on the Safer Banking Act, which is still looking for the 60 votes to pass. Since the Republicans continue to hold up anything that the Democrats are in favor of, it seems like the only thing both of these political parties can actually agree on is whenever there's a threat of a government shutdown. Now, this divide has to change. In the meantime, tribal nations around the country continue to take advantage of their own sovereignty on their own lands. Here in Massachusetts, the Wampanoags have struggled to get investment support, but they did cut a deal with an established vertical in the Bay State. The company and the dispensary is called Theory Wellness. Now, that licensee has offered a $250,000 grant to a member of the Wampanoag tribe named John Marcelino, who runs a startup delivery service called Tribal Fire. That allowed him to set up the security infrastructure and vehicles to launch their delivery service for Theory Wellness. With more on the cannabis scene amongst other tribal nations, here's Tina Tasaka in Nevada.
I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies, and this is the Nevada and Tribal Nations Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. In Tribal Nations, great news for the Great Smoky Cannabis Company located on the tribe's 57,000-acre Kuala boundary. We reported on them back in April 2024 when they opened their dispensary for medical marijuana only for this tribe in North Carolina. The Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians are now selling recreational marijuana to all adults 21 and over, making a milestone for cannabis commerce in North Carolina, where the marijuana is still otherwise illegal. Cannabis sales and use remain illegal off tribal lands in North Carolina, but that didn't stop hundreds of eager customers from flocking to the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians dispensary on September 7th. By noon, cars were backed up on the US 19, and some people arrived as early as 1 a.m. The demand highlights the significance of the milestone, despite cannabis remaining illegal elsewhere in North Carolina. Dispensary officials anticipate generating up to, are you ready for this? $843 million in sales within 5 years. In Las Vegas, Thrive Cannabis Marketplace, the company behind Smoke and Mirrors, is proposing a new cannabis consumption lounge in Las Vegas. This is exciting, in the Arts District, located at 1319 South Main Street. The lounge will feature local art, music, and curated cannabis products. Thrive already operates Smoke and Mirrors, a consumption lounge on Sammy Davis Jr. Drive. A special permit was issued for the 5,800 square foot lounge, which includes a 2,100 square foot outdoor area. Community concerns focus on cannabis odor drifting, especially near share apartments. The City Council will review the proposal on October 16th. That's it for the Nevada highlights and Tribal Nations. I'm Tina Tasaka with 420 Technologies and Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for this week's A Block, or the first section of this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Remember to get easy access to this show and other shows produced over the past 3 years by Pro Cannabis Media by downloading our free app, PCM TV. You can find it on the App Store or on Google Play. When we come back, a tribute to one of the original members of our news team, the late Rick Thompson from Michigan, who passed away a year ago this week. He was a leader of the advocacy movement in Michigan and the former executive director of Normal in that state. Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this.
The people who stand up for their community will show up. We need the rest of you to show up as well. Be the change. Say it with me. Be the change. Be the change. Be the change.
Ready to take your craft to the next level? Imagine faster extractions, purer products, and more profits. Sounds good, right? At Pure 5 Extraction, we've revolutionized cannabis extraction with our game-changing technology. No solvents, no heat, just the cleanest, most natural process on the market. Whether you're a boutique grower or a large-scale operation, Pure 5 has the tools to elevate your business worldwide. Visit pure5extraction.com today. Pure 5 Extraction, because your plants deserve the best.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Welcome back to the B Block of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM Founder Jimmy Young, filling in for Alaina Pinto, who is off this week. But I promise, again, she'll be back in the anchor seat next week. When we first started to produce a weekly news show here at Pro Cannabis Media during the pandemic, Michigan's Rick Thompson joined the Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt and Phil Adams out of Washington, D.C. as regular contributors to the program. In 2021, we had to figure out if a regular news show on a niche industry would be able to get a following and survive. 3 years later, we've had over 1.2 million views of our work on our YouTube channel alone, with more than half generated by our news content. A year ago, we lost Rick Thompson, but his influence in Michigan remains, and one of the founders of the Michigan Weedsters, our own Amy Carter, continues his legacy.
I'm Amy Carter from Michigan Weedsters with the Michigan Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. State officials are investigating allegations of improper record keeping, failure to maintain surveillance footage, and mishandling of cannabis products at the Exclusive Brands facility in Ann Arbor. According to a complaint, more than 10 pounds of marijuana products were unaccounted for at their business. In Ypsilanti, developers plan to open a 4,300 square foot cannabis lounge and outdoor amphitheater on a 6-acre lot. Visitors will be able to purchase marijuana at an adjacent dispensary, consume it indoors, and enjoy live performances. Michiganders living in 2 Oakland County neighborhoods, Royal Oak Township and Lathrop Village, will reportedly have a chance to vote on ballot measures this November to decide whether or not cannabis businesses will be allowed to operate in their communities. Make sure to cast your vote. This week marks the anniversary of the passing of former Michigan news correspondent Rick Thompson. Rick was a remarkable individual, a great friend, leader, and activist whose love, compassion, and dedication to the cannabis community were unparalleled. Let's honor Rick by remembering what he stood for.
Right, here's my medical marijuana card. Right on the bottom, it says authorized to possess plants. No. That means I'm a patient who's dependent upon a caregiver. This bill directly affects me. And I have to tell you, I've been doing this since 2010, coming to testify. This is a shocking level of lack of knowledge on the part of the lawmakers in regards to caregivers, patients, and the medical system itself. There's no way you are all in an educated state where you can be making decisions about what should and should not be made as changes here in the marijuana industry based on the questions that we've had today. There are 30,000 caregivers registered in the state of Michigan. Those 30,000 caregivers service 72,000 patients. Now, if we pass this bill and 30,000 caregivers are only allowed to service one patient, that means 42,000 Michigan voters are going to be booted from their caregiver supply of cannabis immediately.
Through his impactful activism, he played a pivotal role in advancing cannabis freedom in our state, even being recognized by the state of Michigan and the governor by receiving a proclamation. The Michigan cannabis community finally remembered Thompson, commemorating the anniversary of his passing. He believed in community and throughout the years brought so many of us together. Rick Thompson will not be forgotten, and his words and beliefs will be honored. We will continue to protect the freedoms he helped pave the way for. That will do it for this week's news. I'm Amy, reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast.
And congratulations go out to Amy Carter from Michigan for being named one of the Advocates of the Year in Michigan at this past weekend's NECANN trade show in Grand Rapids. Amy has been advocating for her son Jaden, who is challenged by autism, and she has to take him out of high school every day in order to give him his prescribed medicine. She is fighting to get Jaden's law passed that would allow school nurse practitioners to administer medicine during the school day to students who need it just to get through their day. There are 24 adult use legal states in the United States, but the green rush of 15 states legalizing cannabis sales to adults since 2019 has slowed. Ohio and Minnesota were the last two states to move forward, so now the race for number 25 continues. About a year ago, there was momentum in Pennsylvania to move their medical program forward by adding an adult use program. But despite leadership from their governor of that state, John Shapiro, the legislature continues to make a lot of noise about reform, but has not been able to move forward. Now, a bipartisan effort is being resurrected in that keystone state, but no one is very confident that this will be the right time. After all, in cannabis standard time, it's always one step forward, two steps backward. This bill, called House Bill 2500, would put the State Department of Agriculture overseeing the sale, regulation, and distribution of the market that would allow adults to buy and possess 30 grams or just over 1 ounce of weed, but home grow would be limited to those medicinal card holders. Pennsylvania's medical program was started in 2016, and now there's also a clause to favor licensing to those most impacted by the failed war on drugs through expungement and pardons of past nonviolent cannabis crimes. There are currently 15 co-sponsors of this bill, led by Republican Aaron Kaufer and Democrat Emily Kincaid. So, from the race for the 25th legal state continues. In the meantime, let's check in with one of the first two states to legalize. Here's Xavier Jallet in Colorado.
My name is Xavier Jallet, and I am the Colorado correspondent for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm also the director of the Colorado chapter, or I should say director for the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce and chair of the Colorado chapter. And I'm also a non-attorney professional at the McDonald Hopkins law firm. And today I really want to discuss a story that perhaps isn't specific to Colorado, but certainly impacts business operators here, both in the marijuana industry and the hemp industry, and most definitely impacts operators across the nation that are participating in hemp cannabinoid product development, sales, and distribution. And that is that a federal judge has actually pushed back on the DEA determination that THCO acetate, which is, for those that don't know, a more potent, slightly stronger version of Delta-9 THC, the intoxicating compound in cannabis. The federal judge pushed back on the DEA's determination that THCO acetate, under the language of the 2018 Farm Bill, was illegal. The judge said that the 2018 Farm Bill actually does say that downstream products, which would include, in this case, THCO acetate, are authorized and are legal under the language of the 2018 Farm Bill. Now, this is interesting because the DEA has been trying to restrict or narrow, we can say, the language found in the 2018 Farm Bill to not apply to each and every hemp-derived cannabinoid product out there in the market. Now, federal judges have already issued rulings. I think one that comes to mind is the Aker Futures case out of the Ninth Circuit, that say that actually the 2018 Farm Bill language is not ambiguous, and it says very clearly that all downstream products that are derived from a hemp plant are lawful under that language. And so basically the judge has said that the DEA was overstepping its power and authority by determining that THCO was in fact illegal. Now, this is relevant for certainly operators across the nation, but again, operators in Colorado, because this means that many of the hemp-derived products that were under fire from state legislatures, Colorado being one of them, are now potentially, authorized at the federal level. And so it creates a conflict of law between the state prohibition and the federal authorization. Colorado is one of those states. We do have a rule in the books here that says that THCO acetate is a banned cannabinoid that cannot be used in the production of consumable cannabinoid products. And so while Colorado retains the authority under the Farm Bill to actually have that law in the books, states are allowed to preempt or pass more aggressive laws than the federal law for the 2018 Farm Bill concerning hemp. It is interesting to see that now the federal judiciary is stepping in and telling the DEA, wait a second, the determinations you've been making about these cannabinoids, we don't agree with, and we have the final say. And so it might be interesting to see how states respond to this, but also how individual operators take this information and potentially address and create new opportunities for themselves. And so while Colorado might be a state where currently THCO acetate is a compound that's not able to be used in products, it could be interesting to see the introduction or perhaps a lightening of the rules down the road. And the other thing that's going to be interesting to see how Colorado handles the fact that these products are allowed to be made at the federal level, and that surely some states now are going to authorize the production of THCO products in those states as well. And so how Colorado decides to protect its borders and prevent the introduction of these products into the Colorado cannabis market shall be interesting to see. Now, the final thing I want to do here, beyond just a news update, is to really shout out the Colorado cannabis community. Like I said at the top, I am the chair of the Colorado chapter of the Cannabis Chamber of Commerce. I frequent networking events around Denver and the greater Denver area, and sometimes I commute to farther distances around Colorado. And for a long time leading into COVID, the Colorado industry was a bit depressed. I think prices had contracted to the bottom. Operators were not finding the success, the green rush that they had initially been promised, and there have been challenging times. But I do sense lately that there's been an uptick in positivity, in community, and in engagement and enthusiasm for the industry. So just wanted to shout out the local community here in Colorado for banding together, staying in the industry and pushing through some hard times. And I'm excited to see everybody hopefully at our next networking event. Thanks. That's it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast news update from Colorado, and looking forward to seeing you next week.
Now we want to introduce you to a new correspondent on our Coast to Coast news team. His name is Michael Zikaras, and he comes from down under, the country continent of Australia. He works in the industry, and we're looking forward to his regular reports on the legalization movement in that country that has shown actually some similarities with the United States, including some states that welcome and have legalized the plant medicine and some that do not. You've got a federal government, but you also have individual state laws. And sure enough, just like we have here in the States, there's a difference between the federal laws and the state laws, and it's really up to the states to dictate whether or not it's going to be accepted and legal, correct?
Yeah, correct. So we've got our federal government and our state governments. Federally, the cannabis was decriminalized and we're able to use it for medical purposes, but there are still some state laws that are a little bit inconsistent in terms of prescribing, dispensing, and things like that. We're going through a number of changes at the moment, particularly when it comes to compounding flour, where a pharmacist actually puts it in the jar. But a good example of where the discrepancies are is Tasmania, a little state in Australia, separate from the mainland, is the only state at the moment where you're allowed to drive a vehicle with THC in your system. Everywhere in Australia, it's illegal, which is quite a contentious issue at the moment, considering a lot of the traditional medicines.
And how do they tell that you're driving under the influence of THC? Is there a test?
Correct. There's roadside testing, and then if that tests positive, they do a secondary test. So,
but hang on. So this is one of the biggest challenges in the States, as you know, especially in legal states. Everybody's concerned about driving under the influence. However, it's driving while impaired, and that's really the biggest X factor here. Can you operate a vehicle not being impaired and still have THC in your system, which stays 30 days. So is the test a blood test, or is it a swab, or is it, do the alphabet backwards or something ridiculous like that?
It's a swab. It's a mouth oral test. So, and you're correct. It does stay in your system for a number of days, and people that had been impaired a day or two ago, but were no longer impaired, are being charged. So it's quite contentious here, considering you look at the sort of the wide gamut of other medications that people are driving under the influence on. So very topical in Australia at the moment.
Now let's go out onto the left coast, where Oregon's Marian Kersagi reports from Alibi, where legalization just can't happen soon enough to that state.
I'm Marianne from Alibi with the Oregon Cannabis Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. This upcoming legislative session is a long session, so stakeholders are taking the opportunity to craft new legislation. The cannabis industry is finally seeing the light after the scandals last year, and the industry is hoping to be able to work collaboratively with the OLCC and legislators to modernize Oregon's cannabis statutes. The OLCC has restructured and implemented a new management system called CAMP, which should help improve the efficiency of processing license changes and renewals. CAMP was frustrating for many when it was initially implemented, but seems to be working smoothly now. Hopefully, this system with the license moratorium will allow staff to speed up normal license changes, and thus creating the opportunity for improvements in this legislative session. Next, seizures and arrests continue for illicit operators. This week, an illegal site in Washington County was shut down and about 6,600 pounds of cannabis were seized. Authorities were tipped off by odors coming from the property. Also, a traffic stop in Southern Oregon led to the discovery of more than 2,200 pounds of cannabis, presumably headed out of state. And also, an arrest was made at Portland Airport with a man flying from Portland to Colorado carrying 7 pounds of cannabis. Federal legalization can't happen soon enough. That's the Oregon Cannabis Report. I'm Marianne with Alibi for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
That will do it for the B Block, our second section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. When we come back, we will check in on the sights and the people from 2 cannabis festivals from coast to coast, the 12th Hall of Flowers in Santa Cruz, California, and the 35th Freedom Rally in Boston, as Cannabis Coast to Coast News continues after this. It's a whole new world of weed out there, isn't it? Everyone is learning new ways to titrate, ingest, consume, imbibe, and engage with this plant medicine we call cannabis. Now let me tell you my cannabis story. I've had 4 major surgeries in the past 23 years and suffer from osteoarthritis with a variety of metal parts in my body and one on deck. Now, thanks to those chronic pain issues, I've been a medical patient in Massachusetts for almost 10 years now. I remember my first trip to a dispensary just outside of Boston, and I told the bud tender I didn't want to smoke it anymore. So I tried edibles, then tinctures, then vaping, and now if I'm going to smoke, I only use the Weegits filtration system. What? The Weegits.com, Weegits, that's weed, W-E-E-D, G-E-T-S.com, is where you'll find the planet's coolest product that cools the smoke from everyone's favorite flower. The guy that started this was a pretty good medical device manufacturer, and he created this maze pipe that cools the smoking process from 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit upon inflammation down to just 90 degrees when it reaches your mouth. That's right, 1,300 down to 90. That's why this maze pipe is amazing. Now, add in the code of PCMTV and you get 15% off. So just go to Weegits.com and check out the best way to enjoy a cooler smoke with less coughing and hacking and more peace of mind. Welcome back to the C Block, or final section of Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I'm PCM founder Jimmy Young, once again filling in for Alaina Pinto, who has promised me she will be back next week. A reminder that if you want to make it easy to find this week's news show or last week's news show, the best thing to do is to download our free app, PCM TV, and once registered, you'll be able to get on the demand access to this program with just one click. Now, the first publishing of the full show at 9 a.m. Eastern Time on Mondays will be on the homepage of ProCannabisMedia.com and the PCM TV app. Now, we turn to California, where just a week ago, Governor Gavin Newsom wanted to ban all cannabis-derived Delta-8 products, and that state has been so screwed up with this new adult use and now the hemp world that the legal rollout of the plant, after enjoying such a pretty good success with their medical program that was long-lasting for a long time, but now that it's adult use and hemp, they have no idea, and they continue to have problems with their regulation board. Now, 2 weeks ago, Governor Gavin Newsom issued an executive order to ban all cannabis-derived hemp products, but immediately opposition grew to that plan and it shut it down, and that shut down his executive initiative. But as Cornbread Hemp's Jim Higdon explains, Governor Newsom isn't the only governor implementing knee-jerk reactions to the unregulated Delta-8 products.
And what he's trying to do is eliminate safe consumer choice in the marketplace and force consumers into a dispensary system that's lousy with pesticides. So first of all, that it's not great. We at Cornbread make USDA certified organic CBD products, hemp products, including new THC gummies. We make 10 milligram THC gummies made from hemp in a patent pending process that uses exclusively organic inputs for the entire process. The only way a consumer in the cannabis space can know for sure that they're getting a product without pesticides is a product with the USDA organic seal. And the only cannabis products that contain the USDA organic seal are legal hemp products like we make at Cornbread. And Gavin Newsom is trying to restrict California consumer access to USDA organic cannabis products in exchange for sending them into a dispensary system that the LA Times has shown is rife with pesticides.
That's right. And Give Weed Week and Alex Halpern and the LA Times. Needless to say, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is still trying to fight to defeat the passing of Question 3 on that November ballot that, if passed, will add adult use sales to the already flourishing Florida medical market with over 800,000 patients. We certainly know how our Florida correspondent Jeff Aker feels about the passing of Question 3.
This is Jeff Aker, Master Gardener from Florida, with the Florida Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast News. We're going to talk about 3 again. Hey, the one thing about 3 that I don't think anybody's really mentioned or talked about much, so I wanted to bring it up today with you guys, is that right now in the medical program that we have in the state, there is 36,000 employees working right now. I actually worked at Affluent one for a while, and there was a good 200 people there between the mother room, the flowering room, the veg room, the trim room, the packing room. I mean, there was a lot of nice people too. So when the Amendment 3 does pass, because we're all going to vote for it, correct? When the amendment does pass, I can see 50, 60,000 jobs that are going to be created for those people that can't maybe necessarily go to college and get a 4-year degree. More of a tradesperson job, but it's a good industry to be in. There's nice people in the industry. So let's vote for 3. Now, one other thing I wanted to talk about was DeSantis talking about the smell and everybody smelling it. I'm a cigarette smoker. And there's not anywhere in Florida I can go into and smoke inside. I have smoking areas. I've been dealing with this for years. And it's going to be the same thing with cannabis. When it went in to be voted on in Schedule 3, you can only have one topic in Florida for the thing. So we can't throw we couldn't throw the home grows prohibiting smoking. But when they enact it, they can set the rules for not being in school zones, not being in business, smoking inside. They can set the rules when they put it into play. And DeSantis, if we vote 70%, which is looking like, you are a servant of the people. Not, well, I don't think. We don't want you as governors for what you think. You're there to interpret our wants to the federal government. That's what you're there for, as government. So, Jeff Aker, vote 3, Master Gardener, for Cannabis Coast to Coast News.
The state of Idaho has long been one of the longest holdouts for cannabis reform, but now advocates have a plan to get the adult use question on the ballot in 2026. That movement is just beginning, but we will be keeping an eye on their progress. In the meantime, Ohio continues to welcome more adult sales. Here's Christina Brisson with the Ohio Cannabis Report, sponsored by Yellow Labs and their sublingual mists and creams.
In Loveland, Ohio, Emily and Mark seek to deepen their bond through intimacy. They turn to Yellow Labs Rose Oil Massage Cream with delivery technology, promising enhanced pleasure and connection. The cream ignites increased sensitivity and arousal as they apply it, kindling a shared passion. Excited by its effects, they find joy in shared closeness and moments of unity.
I'm Christina Brisson with Over the Top Renovations, with your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report from Cannabis Coast to Coast News. First, I want to just touch on a couple fun facts behind the $54 million in sales. That equates to 6,179 pounds of marijuana sold at an average of $8.95 per gram. And speaking of dispensaries and sales, I was recently at Bloom Medicinals and discovered the Bloom Sessions. The next one's coming up on October 19th. It's a Zoom meeting, and it's supposed to be a monthly educational series with a little Ohio Cannabis 101, some product Q&A, as well as some safe consumption rules. I'm looking forward to find out what information they provide us there. But going on to next is trouble in Hubbard, Ohio. It's one of 110 municipalities or townships that have a moratorium prohibiting adult use businesses within city limits. A local dispensary owner of ACA Dispensary is recently pleading with the council to overturn their decision. He has a dual use license already issued by the state and is unable to use it. Recently, a councilman actually spoke up in support and favor of the company. We wish you the best of luck, ACA. Let's talk about jobs in the state of Ohio in the cannabis industry. When I did a quick search on Google, I found more than 200 available on any job board. But then I was thinking, what do they pay? So I did a quick bit of research, and on ZipRecruiter, they claim they pay from a minimum of $38,000 a year up to $143,000 per year, with the average being at $81,000 per year. That's a pretty big difference. So let's move on to how do we get there? How do you get to that point? Well, it comes back, I would think, to education. In Ohio, we have two notable programs. We have the Cleveland School of Cannabis, and we have Kent State's Green Flowers program. The Green Flowers program has had 140 students attending and registered since January of this year. The Cleveland School of Cannabis has had a significantly increased registration since the legalization of recreational use. They've been around since 2017, and they were the first university accredited across the U.S. They offer programs in the executive side, dispensary, cultivation, and processing. That is your weekly Ohio Cannabis Report. I am Christina Brisson from Over the Top Renovations with Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Have a great week.
The Ohio Cannabis Report is supported by Yellow Labs and BetterWaysToTHC.com. Search for Yellow Labs near me and find one of 40 dispensaries in Ohio carrying these amazing mists and creams. Now that the Fed has cut interest rates by 1/2 point, cannabis stocks joined the overall trading frenzy that was part of this past week's action on Wall Street. And that's where you will find Doug Miller, who is high on Wall Street. And he has the story of Bright Green, one of the first cannabis stocks to be listed on the NASDAQ, and now is just struggling to survive. Sound familiar? Here's Doug Miller.
I'm Doug Miller from High on Wall Street with this week's Cannabis Stock Report for Cannabis Coast to Coast. Bright Green Corp, the first plant-touching marijuana business to trade on a major U.S. stock exchange, said its shares have been suspended from trading on the NASDAQ. The suspension comes after NASDAQ canceled the company's September 26 hearing to appeal its delisting. Bright Green has secured a $2.5 million line of credit to ensure it has the financial resources to support its operations. Bright Green initially was listed on the NASDAQ on May 17th, 2022, under the stock ticker BGXX, and it ran from $8 per share all the way up to $58 per share, giving it a market value of more than $9 billion. But then the stock dropped to less than $3 a share a month after it was listed, and now it's suspended. And in other news, the Fed lowered the interest rate by 0.5 percentage point, and it made the stock market start popping. So keep an eye on the cannabis stocks to start moving after that Fed news. And that is this week's Cannabis Stock Report. Reporting for Cannabis Coast to Coast, I'm Doug Miller.
This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News. So what we have in Canada this week are two great stories. Aurora has signed or officially has been granted a patent when it comes to creating some autoflowers. This is going to be not only a benefit for many of their growing seasons, but it's going to be a benefit for us as consumers due to the fact that the bud will not only be fresher, but it will be a faster turnaround time due to the fact that autoflowers don't need as long as a period to grow, and the space will be able to be available at a shorter period of time. I apologize for that amazing fly that's flying. Next, what we have is an unfortunate story in Manitoba, which is a facilitator that was housing children by the children and youth, and they were giving them marijuana. This place is called the Spirit Rising House, and the owners had been alleged and were investigated and found out that they were providing their youth that was in their care with cannabis. This is something that not only is Manitoba government looking at, but all of Canada is now very much aware of. And we do too have to keep in mind of who is in care or taking care of children that unfortunately are in foster care or in other situations, and making sure that they are in safe situations. And that means not given drugs, especially ones that are not legal to them. This is Debi Facey with the Canadian Cannabis Coast to Coast News. Peace.
And finally today, there were 3 major cannabis celebrations and trade shows over this past weekend, coast to coast. One in Santa Cruz, California. It was called the Hall of Flowers, and they had over 320 vendors on hand with over 10,000 attendees on a beautiful weekend in Northern California. In Michigan, NECANN had their first visit to that state in Grand Rapids, and here in Massachusetts, it was the 35th annual Freedom Rally, which was a critical event to go for the legalization of adult use of cannabis, but of course that was passed in 2016. But now it's just a celebration of good times and good cannabis. You'll be able to tell the difference between these two entities because one was in the sunshine and the other was in the rain and mud and glunk and just gunky, horrible weather, but still thousands of people showed up to celebrate the plant. Well, that'll do it for this week's Cannabis Coast to Coast News. I promise Alaina Pinto will be back next week. For the entire Cannabis Coast to Coast News team, I'm PCM Founder Jimmy Young, reminding you again that it is a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, it's a great question because cannabis is very exciting. It's almost like, mom and pop drugstores. You could start whatever you wanted. You could be pretty successful. And then there are the business people who see the revenue potential. And those are the ones that I think that are going to become the buyers going forward. And then smaller companies will be the sellers. And then there'll be another group of like, what the heck happened? and there'll probably be some craft survivors as well. But I think, the access to capital and business, this is becoming a mature business, just like craft beer or the car industry from, the 1910s to today. Yeah, I think Schedule 3 will have radical changes. I think we're going to see consolidation in the space independent of Schedule 3. Schedule 3 will influence the flavor of the consolidation, but it's going to happen no matter what.
Will that open up more capital?
It'll open up more capital, more access. One way or another, as the industry consolidates, they're going to have to get access to capital. The buyers will, and that's going to change the markets fundamentally.